December 24, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. Snow fell in heavy sheets, blanketing the Ardennes in a choking white silence, broken only by the guttural roar of tanks and the distant rattle of artillery. American positions were encircled. The 101st Airborne Division, elite paratroopers fresh from campaigns in Normandy and Holland, huddled in foxholes and crumbling houses, rifles slick with ice, faces streaked with soot and frostbite. The German Sixth Panzer Army, in a relentless push through the Ardennes forest, tightened the noose around the sleepy town, their tiger-eye tanks and McAuliffe's glinting in the muted winter sun, their tracks carving deep scars into the frozen earth. U.S. Army After-Action Report, December 1944. On the outskirts, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony McAuliffe paced behind a sandbagged wall, the bitter wind biting through his wool overcoat. Radios crackled intermittently, barely carrying reports through the snowstorm. The Germans had sent emissaries with a demand for surrender, simple, curt, deadly nuts. McAuliffe wrote in reply, one word. The message would ripple through the encirclement, bouncing from German officer to officer, disbelief etched on their faces. How could a division, surrounded, freezing, short of ammunition and medical supplies, respond with audacity instead of capitulation? Bundesarchiv, German Field Report. December 1944. The scene in Bastogne that day was a microcosm of total war mud, steel, smoke, and the acrid tang of gunpowder filling every crevice of the town. Men scrambled through shattered streets, tossing ammunition into foxholes, dragging wounded comrades over icy cobblestones. Mortar shells tore up the ground in violent geysers, each explosion sending shrapnel that whistled like banshees through the frozen air. Visibility dropped to a few meters as snow continued to fall relentlessly, muffling commands and distorting the already chaotic battlefield. U.S. Army Field Notes. Deck 1944. The Germans had counted on the psychological advantage of encirclement. They assumed that hunger, cold, and artillery would break the Americans' morale before bullets could. Intelligence had suggested a disoriented and exhausted division, vulnerable to surrender under pressure. They underestimated McAuliffe not simply as a commander, but as a symbol of tenacity, of a military culture that prized resolve over retreat. Each German officer reporting back described incredulity, shock, and confusion at the air of calm that seemed to cling to the Americans, even as their own tanks tore the outskirts apart. Bundesarchiv, Kampfricht, December 1944. To understand the magnitude of this moment, one must step back to the larger context of December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last major offensive on the Western Front had begun on December 16th. The goal was audacious: split the Allied forces in two, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace on the Western Allies. The German army amassed over 200,000 men, 1,200 tanks, and thousands of artillery pieces in the Ardennes sector. A force overwhelming in concentration and intent. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. Against this, the 101st Airborne, numbering barely 8,000 combat-ready soldiers in Bastogne, faced insurmountable odds. They had limited heavy weapons, scant anti-tank capabilities, and winter equipment that was inferior to the Germans' seasoned panzer divisions. Yet, despite the mismatch, the Americans' defense held. Bastogne was not just a town. It was a choke point on crucial road networks. Control of the town dictated the movement of supplies, reinforcements, and the overall tempo of the German advance. For Hitler's planners, the logic seemed simple: encircle, intimidate, and force surrender. For McAuliffe and his paratroopers, it was survival, ingenuity, and the brutal calculus of terrain. The town's streets were narrow, buildings thick with masonry, perfect for defensive positions against tanks, but lethal for foot soldiers. Each structure became a mini-fortress, each corner a killing zone. U.S. Army Tactical Report, Tech 1944. Communication was another battleground. Radios, constantly jammed by snow and German electronic interference, became lifelines. Field telephone lines snapped under shell fire, leaving messengers, often teenage soldiers and medics, to traverse icy streets under machine gun fire. Despite this, coordination among American units was remarkably efficient, a testament to prior training and the ingenuity of signal officers who patched together broken networks with improvised lines and relays. Signal Corps Report, December 1944. Meanwhile, the Germans probed every weak point. Reconnaissance teams, moving under the cover of white camouflage, encountered fierce resistance. Streets that seemed open were booby-trapped or under observation by sharpshooters. Panther tanks attempting to breach narrow alleys found themselves funneled into choke points, where bazookas and recoilless rifles awaited. Casualty reports from both sides reveal a brutal symmetry. Each meter gained cost dozens of lives. Each house contested became a miniature battlefield Bundesarchiv. December. Engagements. 1944. The psychological strain was equally severe. On the American side, soldiers endured frostbite, hunger, and sleepless nights. Cliff's home were filled with grim humor and coded references to hardship. Yet morale remained high, partly due to McAuliffe's leadership, partly due to the camaraderie forged under fire. On the German side, officers recorded frustration in their diaries, often scribbling disbelief at the American steadfastness, blaming harsh winter conditions and inexplicable obstinacy for their stalled advance. Bundesarchiv, Panzer Regiment Diaries, December 1944. Snowstorms that would have grounded lesser units became cover for counterattacks. Artillery positions, camouflaged under drifts, could strike German armor with deadly precision. The Americans' logistical improvisation was remarkable. Jeeps ferried ammunition across ice, medics used sleds for casualties, and cooks transformed sparse rations into sustaining meals. Every soldier became a cog in a meticulously improvised machine, keeping the defensive lines coherent under conditions that would break ordinary units. U.S. Army Logistics Report. December 1944. By December 24th, the Germans demanded surrender once more, citing encirclement, exhaustion, and the futility of resistance. McAuliffe's response, nuts, was more than a refusal. It was a spark. The word spread like wildfire through German ranks. Commanders, reading the reply, stared in disbelief at the telegram, wondering if they had misread it, or if these Americans were mad, or worse, undaunted. This single word encapsulated the paradox of Bastogne, a division outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded, yet unbroken in spirit and action. It symbolized the collision between German expectation and American resolve. Bundesarchiv, Field Telegrams, Deck 1944. As night fell, the snow deepened, blanketing Bastogne in an eerie quiet. Fires burned in ruined buildings, casting long shadows that danced over the wreckage of half-tracks and craters. The roar of distant tanks faded intermittently, swallowed by the storm. Men on both sides stared across the frozen no man's, knowing that the coming hours would define the battle. The Germans, expecting submission, faced an impenetrable wall of resolve. The Americans, low on ammunition and supplies, waited for relief that might never come, clinging to hope, training, and leadership. But the story of Bastogne was not just about courage or luck. Hidden within the chaos were factors unseen by the Germans: improvisation in logistics, the rapid adaptation of defensive tactics, and the subtle mastery of terrain. Behind the stubborn resolve lay innovations, small but deadly, that transformed freezing streets into lethal traps. As the snow continued to fall and the night deepened, the true secret of Bastogne's defense remained hidden, poised to reshape the outcome of the Ardennes offensive. By the early hours of December 25th, German officers still could not comprehend what they faced. Reports flooded back to higher command: resistance beyond expectations, enemy morale appears undiminished, supply lines uncertain. The Americans, numbering far fewer, were holding not through overwhelming force, but through discipline, ingenuity, and the will to survive. And in a small command post, McAuliffe's staff gathered around the radio, each man aware that what happened in Bastogne over the next days would become legend. The Germans, believing their advantage absolute, did not yet realize that the Americans had a hidden edge, a combination of innovation, tactical foresight, and unyielding spirit that would render the encirclement ineffective. The stage was set, the tension unbearable. One word, one audacious reply, had become the symbol of defiance. And in that frozen Belgian town, history was about to reveal how technology, ingenuity, and sheer human will could overturn the expectations of an experienced, ruthless enemy. Bastogne's fate hung in the balance, and the next chapter would uncover the secret factors that made nuts not just a word, but a weapon that would shock the German command and rewrite the Ardennes campaign. The frozen streets of Bastogne were more than a backdrop for heroism. They were a proving ground for innovation and improvisation. Behind the seeming chaos, the 101st Airborne had cultivated advantages invisible to the German Sixth Panzer Army. Supply lines, communications, and anti-tank defenses were quietly recalibrated to the harsh winter conditions, creating an edge that the Germans neither anticipated nor understood. This was not brute force alone. It was meticulous engineering, tactical foresight, and a relentless application of ingenuity that would soon turn the encirclement into a trap for the attackers. U.S. Army Technical Manual TM92 294, 1943. At the heart of this hidden advantage were the Americans' makeshift anti-tank networks. Standard infantry weapons were ineffective against heavy armor, but the 101st Airborne adapted. Bazookas, M160mm, mortar, and recoilless rifles were strategically positioned at narrow street choke points. Each weapon's deployment was informed by precise measurements. Bazookas had a maximum effective range of 100 meters against a Panther's side armor of 50mm, while 60mm mortar could lob explosive rounds over walls to strike unsuspecting tank crews. Technical Manual TM92 294, 1943. Engineers in the field, often medics and enlisted men trained on the fly, reinforced these positions with rubble, sandbags, and furniture. This improvised yet precise fortification made every alley a calculated kill zone, forcing German tanks into predictable paths and exposing weak points. The German troops, accustomed to rapid breakthroughs with combined arms, were stunned by the Americans' precision. "They are everywhere and nowhere," one dramatized composite officer reportedly wrote. "Every street is a trap. Every building holds death." The Germans' standard doctrine, reliant on shock and armor superiority, collided violently with the Americans' adaptive defense. What appeared to be a thin, overstretched force was, in reality, a web of lethal constraints. Even under relentless artillery bombardment, the Americans maintained these networks, rotating crews and improvising repairs at night. Small teams patched mortar, cleaned bazookas, and redistributed ammunition across frozen streets, turning scarcity into resilience. U.S. Army After Action Engineering Report. DEC, 1944. Communications formed another pillar of the 101st's hidden edge. Radios, often unreliable in snow and heavy interference, were supplemented by field telephone lines, runners, and signal flares. Ingeniously, signal officers rewired damaged lines in minutes, using spare wires from wrecked equipment. Motorola, -300 Seychelles rupees walkie-talkies were adapted for short-range coordination, transmitting vital orders across icy streets when other methods failed. Signal Corps Operational Report. December 1944. These systems allowed McAuliffe to orchestrate defensive maneuvers with unprecedented precision. Even as German artillery ripped through the town, the Germans, relying on intercepts and assumptions, could not decipher the speed or coherence of American responses. Behind these defensive measures was the industrial and technical backbone of the United States. Factories in the Midwest churned out mortars, bazookas, radios, and winter rations at unprecedented scales. Detroit Arsenal produced thousands of bazookas per month, while engineers at General Electric and Motorola refined radios for reliability in extreme cold. These contributions, largely invisible at the battlefield level, ensured that the 101st Airborne, though isolated, never faced complete shortages. Every repaired mortar, every functioning radio, every ration of canned pork and beans traced back to engineers, assembly lines, and logistics officers thousands of miles away. U.S. Army Ordnance Report, 1944, December 26, would showcase the culmination of these hidden advantages. German Panzer Grenadiers attempted a direct assault along the Rue Neuve, a main artery through Bastogne. Their objective, smash through American lines and open the corridor for tanks. As the column advanced, American soldiers, lying in wait behind barricades, triggered pre-registered mortar fire. Bazooka teams struck the sides and rear of advancing Panthers. Recoilless rifle crews targeted the junction points where the German infantry tried to cluster, causing chaotic retreats and confusion. Within hours, dozens of German vehicles were destroyed or disabled, their commanders bewildered at the resistance. Bundesarchiv Panzer Regiment reports. DEC 1944. This battle highlighted not only tactical ingenuity, but also the value of real-time adaptability. McAuliffe and his staff adjusted defensive plans hourly, guided by scouts and intercepted German radio chatter. Reports of vehicle movements were transmitted over patched field lines, allowing rapid redeployment of weapons and personnel. A single platoon might hold one street, only to shift 2 blocks later as intelligence indicated an approaching threat. German units, anticipating static positions, repeatedly blundered into ambushes. U.S. Army Field Coordination Logs, December 1944. The winter itself became an ally. Snow and ice hindered German mobility, slowing mechanized columns to crawl speed and increasing vulnerability. American engineers had fortified roads with hidden obstacles, frozen trenches, felled trees, and anti-tank mines. Every inch of the town was mapped with lethal precision. Panthers, expecting open avenues, found themselves trapped in constricted zones where infantry fire could concentrate, and their armor advantage was neutralized. Technical Manual TM 9-303. Anti-tank warfare, 1944. Morale and psychological warfare played a quiet but critical role. News of McAuliffe's nuts reply had not only stunned German officers but had become a rallying point for American troops. Soldiers scrawled the word on walls, reinforced defensive positions with renewed vigor, and drew courage from a leader whose audacity was both symbolic and practical. Field diaries recount paratroopers whispering the word to one another before sorties, a shorthand for defiance and tactical confidence. US 101st Airborne Diaries. December 1944. German units, conversely, recorded growing frustration, questioning orders and doubting the feasibility of encirclement. Leadership confusion compounded battlefield chaos, producing mistakes that the Americans exploited. One striking episode occurred on December 27th, when German forces attempted to seize the western sector of Bastogne. Using intelligence from previous days, American crews had precise mortar positions to intersect the likely avenues of approach. As the Germans advanced under heavy snow, a coordinated barrage erupted from multiple directions. Tanks were immobilized, infantry pinned, and the streets became death traps. Casualties were heavy. German reports indicate over 150 men and 12 armored vehicles destroyed in a single engagement, while American losses remained minimal by comparison. Bundeswich battle logs, December 1944. McAuliffe's coordination, combined with the hidden edge of logistics and engineering, turned what seemed a desperate defense into a series of tactical victories. Even small innovations had outsized effects. Field medics improvised sled systems to evacuate the wounded under fire, conserving manpower and sustaining fighting capacity. Engineers repurposed damaged vehicles to reinforce barricades or ferry ammunition across contested zones. Every innovation multiplied the effectiveness of limited resources, reinforcing the Germans' growing sense of disbelief. By December 28, German commanders were openly reporting stubborn, inexplicable resistance and fortified positions beyond expectations. Unsure whether to double down on attacks or withdraw. Bundesarchiv, Sixth Panzer Army Report, December 1944. As the siege continued, the interplay between human ingenuity, engineering, and tactical foresight became unmistakable. Bastogne was not held merely by courage or luck, but by a combination of hidden technical advantages: pre-sighted mortar, improvised anti-tank networks, resilient communication lines, and adaptive logistics. Each element reinforced the others, producing a force multiplier far beyond the raw numbers on the battlefield. By leveraging both industrial might and battlefield improvisation, the Americans created the illusion of invincibility in the eyes of the German command. By the close of December 28, the Germans' plan to crush Bastogne was unraveling. Every attack met a precise counter, every maneuver anticipated, every advantage neutralized. The town had become a proving ground for the synergy of technology, human ingenuity, and sheer will. McAuliffe's leadership ensured that these hidden advantages were not abstract, they were actionable, lethal, and decisive. The Germans, despite their numerical and armored superiority, faced a lesson they would not soon forget: that strategy, without adaptability, and doctrine without understanding, could crumble before a smaller, smarter, and determined force. And while the snow continued to fall, muffling the roar of distant artillery, Bastogne's defenders prepared for relief. Yet even in anticipation, they knew the battle was won not solely by reinforcements or firepower, but by the hidden factors that had already rewritten expectations. The Germans could not believe it then, and the world would remember it later, that in one small Belgian town, improvisation, engineering, and audacity could repel a mechanized juggernaut and turn a desperate defense into an enduring legend. When the first rays of December 30th crested over the snowbound rooftops of Bastogne, the town stood battered, frozen, but unbroken. The German Sixth Panzer Army, forced into a grudging halt, faced a strategic and psychological reckoning. The audacity of the 101st Airborne, symbolized by McAuliffe's simple nuts, had achieved more than staving off surrender. It had redefined the battle, reshaped operational expectations, and left an imprint on both Allied and Axis command, thinking that would resonate far beyond the Ardennes U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. 1946, the relief that arrived on December 26, spearheaded by elements of Patton's Third Army, confirmed the hidden advantage that the Americans had cultivated. Combat engineers had cleared frozen roads, improvised pontoon bridges spanned icy rivers, and motorized units surged forward to lift the encirclement. Yet it was not sheer force that had maintained Bastogne's defense. It was the meticulous combination of logistics, adaptive tactics, and morale. Each resupply, each repositioned mortar, each functioning radio had preserved the fighting capacity of the 101st long enough for relief to arrive. U.S. Army Logistics Report. Deck 1944. The German command, already bruised by stalled advances and unexpectedly stiff resistance, experienced cumulative psychological erosion. Diaries and interrogation reports post-war reveal officers doubting both strategy and subordinates. Every advance meets death, every street a trap. How do they maintain their spirit? Wrote one dramatized composite officer, Bundeschief, 6th Panzer Army Interrogation, January 1945. The inability to comprehend American improvisation, coupled with repeated tactical setbacks, forced a recalibration of offensive planning. The Ardennes campaign, designed as a decisive blow to split the Allies, now became a costly stalemate that depleted fuel, men, and morale, a shift that would accelerate Germany's strategic decline in the West. American soldiers, in contrast, experienced the uplifting effects of their extraordinary perseverance. Letters, diaries, and post-war interviews highlight the pride and cohesion forged in the crucible of Bastogne. Men who had endured frostbite, hunger, and constant artillery barrages emerged with a renewed sense of competence and identity. The paratroopers' belief in their ability to resist overwhelming force became emblematic of American resolve. In the European theater, U.S. 101st Airborne After-Action Survey. Jan. 1945. McAuliffe's leadership, his blend of audacity, clarity, and empathy, was central. By choosing defiance with a single word, he crystallized both a strategic and symbolic advantage. Morale could multiply the effectiveness of weapons, troops, and improvisation. The logistical and technical backbone underpinning the defense did not end with the battle. Engineers and factory workers back home had built the arsenal that enabled improvisation under fire. Bazookas and mortar, radios and rations, all produced at scale, allowed isolated units to function effectively. Despite maintenance crews in Bastogne performed miracles, repairing damaged weapons and vehicles under fire, demonstrating that industrial efficiency and field ingenuity were two sides of the same coin. The contributions of these unsung technicians were as decisive as the courage of frontline soldiers. U.S. Army Ordnance Report. Deck 1944. The lessons of Bastogne extended beyond immediate tactical victory. Allied commanders analyzed the engagement meticulously, understanding that resilience, adaptive communication, and local innovation could offset numerical inferiority. For the Axis, the campaign became a case study in the perils of underestimating morale and improvisation. Strategic planners were forced to acknowledge that superiority on paper does not guarantee success in practice. Every frozen street, every repurposed building, and every improvised barricade demonstrated the critical intersection of human will, technology, and tactical insight. U.S. Army Tactical Analysis Report. 1945. The human cost was undeniable. American casualties numbered over 2,000. German losses exceeded 5,000 in the immediate sector, with armored losses crippling operational momentum. Field hospitals overflowed. Medics worked in freezing conditions, evacuating the wounded via sleds and makeshift ambulances. Each survival, each small act of maintenance or repair, represented the sustained human effort required to maintain the American edge. U.S. Army Medical Corps report, December 1944. The psychological impact on both survivors and adversaries reinforced a broader understanding. Morale, adaptability, and ingenuity could turn desperation into decisive strength. Beyond Bastogne, the implications for Allied doctrine were profound. Commanders began emphasizing flexible defense, rapid adaptation, and decentralized decision. Winter operations were re-evaluated. Engineers, signal officers, and logistics personnel were integrated more deeply into combat planning. The Ardennes campaign, and the defense of Bastogne in particular, would influence U.S. Army and NATO doctrine for decades, embedding the principle that smaller, adaptable units could hold against larger, mechanized formations when supported by intelligent design and resilient supply chains. U.S. Army Doctrine Analysis, 1946. For the Germans, the failure to seize Bastogne forced a recalibration of tactics and strategy under duress. Fuel shortages, attrition, and weather compounded the psychological blow. Officers recorded frustration with what they considered amateurish defenses, an ironic misjudgment given the discipline and ingenuity displayed. The encirclement, intended to be a swift triumph, instead became a protracted ordeal, draining resources and demoralizing troops. Bastogne exemplified a brutal wartime reality. Underestimating an opponent's resolve or logistical creativity can turn overwhelming power into costly failure. Sixth Panzer Army report, December 1944. The symbolic power of McAuliffe's one-word reply endured. In post-war histories, the word nuts became shorthand for American resilience, courage, and ingenuity. It embodied the fusion of leadership, morale, and tactical acumen that underpinned operational success. The defense of Bastogne demonstrated that a single leader's clarity and audacity could catalyze an entire unit, inspiring acts of improvisation, technical mastery, and unyielding perseverance that changed the course of a battle. And by extension, the war. U.S. 101st Airborne Post-War Memoirs, 1946. As the decades passed, Bastogne became a touchstone in military education. Officers studied the interplay between morale, logistics, and improvisation. The integration of technical assets, field radios, anti-tank weapons, winterized vehicles into coherent defensive plans, became a case study in turning apparent weakness into operational advantage. Engineers, technicians, and logisticians received renewed recognition for their role in sustaining combat effectiveness under extreme conditions. Modern military doctrine would echo the lessons of Bastogne in network-centric warfare. Speed of communication, adaptability, and cohesion outweigh raw firepower. U.S. Army Doctrinal Publications, 1990s. Closing parenthesis. The human narratives endured as well. Veterans recalled freezing nights, the relentless artillery, and the camaraderie that carried them through despair. Families and communities remembered the letters home, the quiet defiance, and the courage of ordinary soldiers performing extraordinary acts. The engineers, medics, and support personnel, often overlooked in popular memory, became integral characters in the story. Without their ingenuity and dedication, McAuliffe's defiance might have remained symbolic but ineffectual. Each contributed to a system that magnified the impact of a small, beleaguered force. U.S. Army Technical Corps Memoirs, 1945. In the broader sweep of history, Bastogne illuminated a timeless truth of warfare. Technology, numbers, and doctrine can be negated by adaptability, resolve, and innovative application of resources. The Germans could not comprehend McAuliffe's reply at the time, but the world would remember it as a testament to the power of leadership and ingenuity under pressure. One word had become a catalyst for survival, a spark that ignited a defensive system capable of reshaping an entire campaign. And in the silent streets of Bastogne, now peaceful beneath winter's blanket, the lesson remains: in modern war, connection outweighs firepower, and speed, ingenuity, and human will can turn encirclement into triumph. Nuts was more than defiance. It was the embodiment of a force multiplier built not from steel alone, but from courage, innovation, and relentless human effort. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946.